I live with more than one voice in my head. My brain has often felt like this weird group chat between three very different friends that keep messaging on each other, depending on whether I want to make a joke, share a news, or talk about something serious. And this has been my life as long as I can remember. I am Nelly, I come from Armenia, and I speak three languages: Armenian, Russian, and English. At first, I thought nothing special about it, right? Because actually, half of the world's population speaks two or three languages. However, what makes my experience slightly more unique is that these three languages, they belong to different branches of Indo-European family. So they quite fundamentally differ from each other. To continue with my story, I spoke Armenian at home because it's my native language, obviously. Russian always surrounded me, starting from cartoons till everyday conversations. In fact, you know what we like to do? We like kidnapping Russian words, dressing them into Armenian pronunciation, and then pretending that it's ours. For example, in English, it will be tomatoes. In Russian, pomidory. And in Armenian, we say pomidor. I'm sure for the people who speak the language, this sounds way funnier. And English surrounded me starting from kindergarten age, as it has become a language of internet and, of course, education that can guarantee you a bright future. So I never paid any special attention to my languages, right? I just spoke them like others did. Until one day, one of them started slipping away. And that terrified me. 2 years ago, I moved to Lithuania to study abroad in an international university, where people come from all over the world. And English became my dominant language of daily communication and, of course, education. For the first time in my life, I was constantly switching between these three languages. I spoke English with some, Russian with others, Armenian with friends and family on the phone. Sometimes all three in one day, sometimes all three in one sentence. And at first it felt fun. You know this feeling when one word comes to your mind faster than the other? So you just throw it away, hoping that people will understand you? This was me the whole time. In linguistics, this is called code switching. And don't worry, it's a natural process. This does not indicate that your language is broken. In fact, it just showed that they are highly interconnected and influence each other. After moving abroad for a long time, I went back home and something strange happened to me. The simplest Armenian words started disappearing. Not poetic words, just normal, everyday conversational words, such as garden or fishing. After English became my dominant language, Armenian became slower and simpler. Another funny and slightly frustrating part of this is that people who never experienced it, they don't believe you. They think that you are faking and you're using all these foreign words to sound more fancy and modern. But you can actually get use of it because all these small mocking moments, they help you to become more self-conscious of the way you speak. So I even remember the exact moment. It was during the break. I was standing in my own kitchen, looking out of the window and admiring the sky, and I wanted to say Mayramut in my own language. But my brain immediately offered me English word sunset. And that moment felt deeply wrong and disappointing. I remember thinking, how can I forget the language I have spoken my whole conscious life? How can the language of my childhood suddenly hesitate inside of me? I know this sounds dramatic, but actually it scared me. Because this is not only about vocabulary. It felt like that something big inside of me was moving out of reach. Another interesting part of this story is that my mother is teacher of Armenian language and literature. So I took the language very seriously, starting from young age. Compared to all other kids in high school, I used to take extra classes. And at one point, I became so confident in my Armenian that I never thought it can become something I need to take care of and protect. Later, I found out that what I experienced actually has a name. It's called first language attrition. In linguistics, this is explained as the gradual weakening of your native language over time, especially when foreign language becomes dominant in your daily life. So it was basically happening to me. In simpler words, no, your brain doesn't erase it, but it makes it harder for you to reach. And to be honest, I find this both comforting and disturbing because it basically means congratulations, you're not losing your mind. But yes, your brain will absolutely betray you if you neglect your language. And this is when I realized language is not something we need to take granted for. It is something we have to keep alive. So I panicked a little bit, and I did what any emotionally unstable, literature-loving person would do. I ran to our local library, and I started bringing home Armenian books, and I was constantly reading them. And I surrounded myself with the language, not only for conversations, but for books. Because books often do something that conversations don't. They wake up these forgotten corners of the language. And in a strange way, they woke up these forgotten corners inside me too. One of the books that I picked was by a French-Armenian author. It's called Retreat Without Song. Of course, I won't go through whole details telling you the novel, but one moment in it stayed with me deeply. So it was a story about immigrants that went to Paris, and they were struggling to hold on into their identity and language. So after living in Paris for decades, the main character suddenly loses his loved one. And in this moment of shock, grief, and just suffering, he does something that maybe many of us would do. He starts praying. And after saying the first few lines of the Lord's Prayer in Armenian, he suddenly switches to French because he can no longer simply remember the words. And that scene shook me because this book did not only help me to regain my forgotten vocabulary, but it also showed me through this character's life what can happen to me tomorrow if I neglected my language today. However, after reading, my Armenian quickly came back, and I started paying attention to something even more interesting. Not only what languages I spoke, but who I became in each of one. And I'm sure if you speak more than one language, you may know this feeling, right? That you do not feel exactly the same person in all of them. In fact, there is a linguistic idea behind this, and it's called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This claims that the language we speak, it influences the way we think, and it shapes our worldview. To me, this does not sound theoretical at all. It just makes perfect sense, because I know that I debate better in English, I joke better in Russian, and I express my emotions better in Armenian. And I feel like people will always choose their native language when they want to say something that seriously matters to them. Before moving abroad, I viewed my languages as different subjects and skills in my head, but now I know they are more like rivers. Sometimes one goes quieter, sometimes another goes stronger, but together they shape the landscape of who I am. So today, I no longer view multilingualism as if it is a talent, as if you speak a language, you will know it forever, because it is simply not true. Languages are more like relationships, and relationships do not survive without attention, because you cannot ignore your partner for years and then expect intimacy to stay. So over time, I became more intentional. I understood that if I want to keep my languages alive, I need to give each of them separate place in my life. And I do not mean by this opening notebook and writing like weekly maintenance of my linguistic identity. No, it can be done in simple things. Sometimes a single friendship can become home for a language. And I have a great example for this. One of my childhood friends, she moved abroad years ago, and once she told me that I was the only person who kept speaking Armenian with her regularly. And after we stopped talking for a while, she could feel how her language was getting weaker and weaker. And it stayed with me because this showed me that language does not only live inside of a book or a classroom, but sometimes it can live just inside this one person who keeps speaking it back to you. Because if language is only used for survival, for email, for translation, for homework, it just loses its warmth. But when it is used for laughter or even arguments, it stays alive differently. And it is a living part of us. And for me, there is more interesting layer to this story. Besides speaking 3 languages, I happen to know this very distinct dialect in Armenian because my parents originally come from a small town and I spent many summers of my childhood there. So alongside with my official Armenian, I grew up speaking and hearing another version of it that sounded much more warmer and of course stranger. And I'm sure if you come from any place with dialect, you may know that dialects are not wrong languages. They are intimate languages. They carry the humor and uniqueness of their communities. I have to admit that one of the most unforgettable, funny, and descriptive words I know exist only in dialect. And it is even hard for me to translate, but I will try my best. So if a person is physically not very flexible, we call them wood stick. And word troublemaker, it might be described as person who disturbs kind people. I know it's another form of I've tried. Yet, dialects sometimes are the first things that people get ashamed of, especially young people, especially when they are moving to big cities, universities, or any other formal places. Suddenly, the way your grandmother speaks is something you need to hide. And to me, this is heartbreaking, because if we lose dialects, we do not only lose words, we just lose local memory and culture and the way of how others see the world. And I say this very personally because I wasn't always confident in mine. In fact, I used to get laughed at for it. One of my childhood flashbacks is that I was 12 years old. My cousin, he literally locked me in a car and he forced me to speak dialect so he could just make fun of how strange I sounded. I'm sorry for sharing childhood traumas. And I officially want to announce here today, this is not an ideal language preservation strategy. Please do not try it. But jokes aside, the memory stayed with me because shame can make people go silent very quickly. And silence is the first step how languages fade away. In fact, our attitude towards our native language turns out to be the dominant factor deciding attrition. So please, if somebody speaks with dialect, accent, mixed sentence, or different read, maybe do not laugh at first. Maybe listen first. Before moving abroad, I never thought about any of this deeply. I simply spoke. But distance changed that. Distance made me understand that language might be the core part of our identity, even though we rarely name it that way, right? Because when we are asked about our culture, we immediately mention, music, food, traditions, dances. But I think that language may be the first key to all of it. And if this is true, then it deserves much more respect and attention than we give to it. So today, I no longer think of multilingualism as just something cool. Yes, it is impressive, it is important, it helps us with travel, education, communication, networking, job, everything. But today, it has become something much more important to me. It has become a responsibility. So I want to tell you this. If you speak more than one language, please do not take that lightly. Feed them, repeat them, read in them, listen, and laugh in them, even fight in them if you want. Just please, do not let them go silent. And before diving into the world of linguistics, I used to think of languages as different boxes in my brain. But now I know they are just threads in one woven piece. They're just like muscles in our body. They cross each other and sometimes they pull on each other. But together they make me of who I am. So maybe my brain will always be this weird group chat between friends. But you know what is important? That I don't want any of these friends to stop texting or, in worst case scenario, to leave the chat. Thank you.